What's up guys, it's River and today we're looking at the Canon T7. So this camera is known as the best-selling DSLR on the market, but also the best budget camera. We're gonna find out if it's actually worth the hype or if it's just marketing. Also, I did an in-depth comparison of this camera with other cameras that are actually more expensive than this camera to see how it really stacks up. Let's dive right in. So obviously, one of the reasons this camera is so popular is because it's extremely affordable. But how much were they really able to pack into such an affordable package, and how does it stack up to other cameras on the market that cost the same or a little bit more? So right off the bat, this camera has a 24 megapixel Canon APS-C size sensor, which is actually the exact same sensor as the Canon 80D. So I'm happy to report that in the studio setting, you will get the exact same image in this camera as that $1,300 camera, but this camera has a slightly lower end image processor, which I don't think you'll notice unless you're doing professional level work or doing extreme low light work. However, there's more to the story than just the sensor. So as for photos, this camera does 3 frames per second in continuous autofocus, and the autofocus in this camera is super solid. So whether you're doing portraits, landscapes, kids, family vacation, whatever have you, you're going to get super solid photos out of this camera unless you're doing something with high action like sports or dance. This camera isn't quite fast enough and you will end up missing your shots. But if you're a casual shooter or a hobbyist, you will be very happy. If you do need to shoot a lot of action, I totally have you covered. I have a solution for you at the end of this video. And one of the reasons you'll get amazing images out of this camera is not just the sensor, but it's also the amazing Canon color science. The colors look good right out of the box, almost like they've already been edited. And because of that color science, people look amazing because skin tones on this camera just look good. Everybody looks attractive on a Canon camera. So, well, we know this camera takes gorgeous photos, but is the video any good? And I'm happy to report this camera does full HD 1080p at 24 and 30 frames per second. Plus, it retains all of the Canon color science from the photos. So the actual image when it comes to video is still gorgeous. The skin tones look good and the environments are beautiful. This camera also has slow motion. It does 60 frames per second at 720p. However, 720p is a bit low res for me, but for social media and personal videos, that should be just fine. Also, something to note, this camera doesn't have any stabilization built into the body or the lens. So you'll get a very good image, but when it comes to video, you might see a little bit of jitteriness. You just have to make sure to keep the video very stable or get a stabilized lens, which Canon makes very good stabilized lenses. But there's a huge glaring issue with the video in this camera. The autofocus is trash. I love the autofocus in this camera for photos, but for video, it just tends to go in and out a lot. It does a lot of hunting. If you're doing any kind of professional work with it, the autofocus in this camera is not good enough. But if you're just shooting yourself, going on vacation, it's all for personal videos, you probably won't even notice it. And the video autofocus in this camera does not make this a bad camera at all. That's one of the factors that makes this camera so incredibly affordable. Also, quick side note guys, this camera does not have a built-in microphone input. So whatever audio you get will actually be the camera's internal audio, and you will not, unfortunately, be able to plug in your own mic. And next, let's talk about the body and design of this camera and all the nifty features it offers. In terms of the body, it's a small, lightweight, and compact camera. Canon makes a very quality hardware, so if you take care of this camera, it will last you forever. The ergonomics on this camera are great. The button layout is perfect. It's very easy to use and it's very easy to learn if you're new to cameras. Also, it fits perfectly in my hand, but it still has a nice deep grip despite being a smaller camera. Design-wise, this camera has everything I could possibly want in an entry-level DSLR, including an onboard flash, which is really helpful for low light situations. The only thing that this camera lacks that I really wish it had is a flip screen that comes out to the side. That way I could see myself and it would be easier to shoot low angle and high angle photos and videos. But personally, at this very affordable price point, I'm really not that upset about it. And one thing that I was really happy to see on a camera like this is actually NFC and Wi-Fi. You can actually connect this camera straight to your phone, take your photos straight from the camera to your phone, edit them on your phone, Instagram, what have you, and share them on social media or share them with family and friends. That's a really nifty feature to have on a camera like this. And lastly, that brings us to the most exciting part of this video, a camera comparison to see how this camera really stacks up to its competition, and is this camera worth the hype? Who should buy this camera and should you buy this camera? So I actually ended up comparing this to my Sony a6500 and my Canon G7X, and I was very pleasantly surprised by the results. So, the Canon T7 may not have fancy features like dual pixel autofocus or 1080p at 60 frames per second, but what it does have, it does super well. I thought the image quality of this camera really stacks up, and I almost cannot tell that this is a much cheaper camera than the a6500 and the G7X Mark II. It's pretty obvious to me which camera is which, but I actually thought the a6500 did not look quite as good as the Canon T7. I really like the color science that comes out of the Canon camera, and I'm happy to report that at this affordable price, you still get that gorgeous Canon image just without all the bells and whistles. And if you're someone that's just using this as a hobby, or it's just your personal camera, you probably don't need all those bells and whistles or those professional features. But if you're gonna be using this for professional work, here are a few cameras that I'd recommend over the Canon T7 to make up for the features that this camera lacks without going that much over the cost of this Canon T7. So the two cameras that I'd recommend over the Canon T7 if you're doing professional work and you need all those bells and whistles are two other Canon cameras, the Canon SL3 and the Canon T7i. Both of these cameras are only about $200 to $250 more, and they have features like 4K video, 1080p at 60 frames per second for slow motion video, and they also have Canon's dual pixel autofocus, which is phenomenal autofocus specifically for video. It is almost like set it and forget it, and is a very accurate autofocusing system. The only difference between the Canon SL3 and the T7i are that the Canon SL3 is mainly for someone that's going to be doing video. It does have a flip out screen, and the Canon T7i is almost the same as the Canon SL3, but the T7i has a few more autofocus points when it comes to photos. If you want to go all the way, I highly recommend the Canon T7i, but if you just want to do a little bit of video, the Canon SL3 is kind of like this camera with a flip out screen, but better video autofocus.